You think your thoughts are private. You think that until you open your mouth, you're safe. That your intentions, your fears, your desperation, all of it stays locked behind your eyes, where no one can reach it. That's what ordinary people believe. Billionaires know differently. They've spent decades learning to read what you're broadcasting without realizing it. Every micro-expression that flickers across your face for a fraction of a second. Every subtle shift in your posture before you've consciously decided to move. Every word you choose, every word you avoid, every pause that lasts just a beat too long. By the time you sit down across from someone who has truly mastered the art of reading people, they already know your position. They already know your pressure points. They already know whether you're desperate or confident, whether your number is real or inflated, whether you'll fold or hold. The negotiation is already over. You just don't know it yet. This isn't mysticism. This isn't some intuitive gift that certain people are born with. This is a learnable, systematic skill that the ultra-wealthy have invested enormous resources in developing. They've hired behavioral psychologists. They've studied FBI interrogation techniques. They've read the same research papers that intelligence agencies use to detect deception. And they've practiced obsessively in thousands of high-stakes interactions until reading people became as automatic as breathing. Today you're going to learn exactly how they do it, the specific signals they look for, the psychological frameworks they apply, the dark reality of how much you're revealing without ever saying a word. Most people think the reading begins when the conversation starts. Wrong. It begins the moment you enter the room. Before a single word is exchanged, a skilled reader has already cataloged a dozen data points about you. They've assessed your walk, confident and purposeful, or hesitant and searching. They've clocked your eye movement. Did you scan the room to understand it, or did you look for approval and direction? They've registered your first expression when you spotted them. Genuine pleasantness, nervous performance, or something trying to hide itself. Paul Ekman, the psychologist whose work on micro-expressions became the foundation of modern deception detection, discovered something that fundamentally changed how the most sophisticated operators approach human interaction. Emotions produce involuntary facial expressions that last between 1/25th and 1/5 of a second. These expressions cannot be consciously suppressed. They appear before the brain's deliberate control systems can intercede. What this means in practice is devastating. You can smile warmly at someone while your face flashes genuine contempt for a fraction of a second before the smile arrives. You can express confidence while fear flickers across your brow for a moment too brief to consciously register. Most people miss these signals entirely. They're watching the performance you're putting on. Billionaires who've trained themselves to read micro-expressions are watching the truth playing underneath it. Warren Buffett is famous for making acquisition decisions extraordinarily quickly. Meetings that others expect to run for hours are sometimes concluded in minutes. His explanation always involves the financials, the business fundamentals, the numbers. What he rarely discusses publicly is the parallel assessment happening simultaneously, the reading of the person across the table, their relationship with their own company, their genuine versus performed confidence in their asking price, their tells when they talk about what they're selling. The first 5 seconds give him much of what he needs. The face is only one channel. The body is broadcasting on frequencies most people have never been trained to receive. Here is a foundational truth that elite readers operate by. The body reacts before the mind decides. This is not metaphor, it's neuroscience. The limbic system, which governs emotional response, processes threat and opportunity faster than the prefrontal cortex, which governs rational thought and conscious control. This means your body begins responding to a situation before your conscious mind has formed a deliberate reaction. A skilled reader knows this. They're watching your body as a window into your limbic system, the part of you that cannot lie. When someone hears a number that threatens them, their body contracts. Shoulders draw slightly inward. The chin drops a fraction. The torso subtly turns away from the source of the threat, as if preparing for physical withdrawal. These movements are tiny, often less than a centimeter, but they're real, and they're consistent, and someone who knows what they're looking for will catch them every time. When someone hears something they want, genuinely want, not performatively want, the opposite happens. The body opens, shoulders settle back. There's a barely perceptible lean forward. The feet, which most people never think to control, rotate toward the thing they desire. The feet are particularly revealing because they're so far from conscious awareness that even trained performers forget to manage them. Ray Dalio built Bridgewater Associates into the world's largest hedge fund by applying radical transparency to human behavior. He studied what people revealed through their behavioral patterns, their emotional reactions under pressure, the gap between their stated positions and their actual comfort levels, the moments when their confident assertions didn't match their physiological responses. He turned the reading of people into an institutional process, applying it not just to negotiating counterparts, but to his own team members, building psychological profiles that allowed him to predict behavior before it manifested. He understood something that most people resist accepting. Humans are far more predictable than they believe themselves to be. The patterns are consistent. The signals are reliable. The only variable is whether the person across the table knows how to read them. You've been taught to listen to what people say. Billionaires listen to how they say it. The content of speech is the most consciously constructed element of communication. You choose your words deliberately. You think about them. You edit them before they leave your mouth. The content is where people invest their energy in managing perception. But the voice, the pitch, the pace, the rhythm, the micro-hesitations, this is far harder to control, and it reveals everything that the chosen words are working to conceal. When someone is genuinely confident in their position, their speech has a particular quality. The pace is measured and unhurried. The pitch stays relatively stable. There are no unnecessary qualifiers. No, well, I think, or, you know, or something like that. The sentences land with finality. The confident person doesn't need you to accept what they've said immediately. They're comfortable letting it sit. When someone is performing confidence over underlying uncertainty, the signals are different. The pace accelerates almost imperceptibly as the person unconsciously tries to get through the dangerous territory faster. Unnecessary words fill the spaces. Basically, honestly, to be frank with you, qualifiers multiply. The pitch rises slightly at the end of declarative statements, turning them into quasi-questions, unconsciously seeking your validation of what should be a confident assertion. This is why Steve Jobs never rushed. In any negotiation, any presentation, any confrontation, his speech was slow, deliberate, and completely free of seeking energy. He didn't need you to agree. He wasn't looking for your validation. That quality in his voice, that absence of seeking, communicated power more effectively than any argument he could have made. People felt it without being able to articulate what they were feeling. They experienced it as charisma, or certainty, or vision. What it actually was the voice of someone who had genuinely eliminated the need for your approval. The micro-hesitation is particularly revealing in negotiation. When you ask someone about their walk-away number, the true minimum they'll accept, pay attention to what happens in the syllables before they answer. A genuine number comes quickly, because it's a known fact. A manufactured number requires construction, and that construction takes time even when the person tries to disguise it. That fraction of a second pause before the answer. The slight intake of breath before the number is stated. These are tells, and they're consistent. Reading people isn't only about what they broadcast, it's equally about what they deliberately withhold. And the patterns in that withholding are just as revealing as the signals themselves. When someone avoids a topic, they're telling you the topic matters. The avoidance itself is information. If you're discussing an acquisition and the founder never voluntarily mentions the company's relationship with its largest client, that silence is pointing directly at a pressure point. The things that are easy to talk about get mentioned. The things that threaten the position get managed away from. Sophisticated readers in high-stakes negotiations develop a mental map of the conversation's negative space. They track what hasn't been said. They note which questions get answered with counter-questions. They register which topics produce subject changes. They watch for the moment when someone becomes suddenly very detailed and technical, often a sign of moving away from emotional territory into the safer ground of facts and figures. George Soros has spoken about his approach to understanding markets, but the same framework applies to his approach to people. He looks for reflexivity, the way that a person's beliefs about a situation affect the situation itself, and how that creates feedback loops. In human terms, this means watching how someone manages their own narrative about a negotiation. Are they telling themselves they're winning? What does that self-deception require them not to see? Those blind spots are exactly where leverage lives. The most valuable negative space of all is the question someone doesn't ask. In any negotiation, the informed party knows what due diligence requires. If the other side isn't asking questions that an informed party would ask, that silence tells you something critical about their knowledge, their preparation, or their desperation. A desperate buyer doesn't ask hard questions because they're afraid the answers might give them reasons to walk away. A desperate seller doesn't probe the buyer's financing because they're afraid the answers might threaten the deal. That desperation, invisible in what's said, completely visible in what's not said, hands you the leverage. Here is where amateurs make the critical mistake. They learn one signal. Crossed arms mean defensiveness. Avoiding eye contact means lying. And they start reading single signals as definitive conclusions. This is how people misread situations and make terrible decisions. Elite readers don't operate on single signals. They read clusters. A cluster is when multiple signals across multiple channels, face, body, voice, word choice, what's avoided, are all pointing in the same direction simultaneously. A single signal can have a dozen innocent explanations. A cluster of 7 signals all pointing to the same psychological state is something much harder to dismiss. When someone crosses their arms, that alone tells you almost nothing. They might be cold. They might have a physical habit. They might have back pain. But when they cross their arms and their pace of speech accelerates, and they begin using more qualifiers, and their eye contact frequency drops, and their feet rotate away from you, and a micro-expression of contempt flickers across their face when you mention your price, that cluster is a diagnosis, not a guess. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's partner at Berkshire Hathaway, has spoken extensively about mental models, the frameworks through which highly effective thinkers process complex situations. His approach to reading people is essentially a mental model approach applied to behavioral data. He doesn't react to individual signals. He builds a picture from multiple signals over time, looking for the patterns to solidify before drawing conclusions. This patience, the willingness to collect data rather than jump to premature interpretation, is what separates elite readers from overconfident amateurs. The patience is itself a tool. Because while the skilled reader is quietly collecting data, the other person has no idea they're being read at all. They think the conversation is about the stated subject. They don't realize the real assessment is happening beneath the surface of every exchange. You cannot read what's abnormal until you understand what's normal for that specific person. This is the principle that separates the truly elite readers from everyone else. Most people try to apply universal signals universally, but human beings are not universal. Some people naturally have faster speech. Some people are naturally avoidant with eye contact. Some people have habitual self-touching behaviors that have nothing to do with deception or stress. Reading these behaviors as meaningful signals when they're actually that person's baseline is how you generate false positives that lead to disastrous misreadings. The elite approach is to establish baseline first. In the early minutes of any interaction, before the high-stakes content begins, skilled readers engage in deliberate rapport building that serves a dual purpose. On the surface, it's warmth and relationship building. Underneath, it's calibration. They're watching how this specific person behaves when they're relaxed and the stakes are low. The pace of their speech, their default eye contact patterns, how they hold their body when they're comfortable, their natural breathing rhythm. Once the baseline is established, deviations from it become enormously meaningful. If someone who naturally speaks quickly suddenly slows down when discussing a specific topic, that deceleration is significant. If someone who maintains strong eye contact suddenly looks away when a particular question arises, that break from pattern is significant. It's not the behavior itself that carries information. It's the change from the person's established normal. FBI. Behavioral analysts apply exactly this principle in interrogation. The most famous example involves asking subjects questions they know the answers to, establishing a clear behavioral baseline for truthful responding, before asking the questions they actually want answered. Then the deviations from baseline under the real questions tell the story. Billionaires apply the same principle in boardrooms and acquisition meetings. The small talk isn't small. The preliminary pleasantries aren't just courtesy. They're intelligence gathering, a deliberate and systematic calibration of this specific human being's behavioral baseline, so that when the real conversation begins, every deviation carries genuine analytical weight. Reading people is only valuable if you know how to act on what you've learned. And this is where the truly elite operators reveal themselves, not just in their ability to read, but in their discipline about how they deploy that knowledge. The amateur who reads a signal acts on it immediately and obviously. They spot desperation and immediately push harder. They detect uncertainty and immediately exploit it. This is a fundamental error. It alerts the other party that they've been read, causes them to recalibrate their behavior, and destroys the information advantage the reading created. The elite reader acts on their intelligence carefully, strategically, and often invisibly. They file away what they've learned and continue the conversation as though nothing has been detected. They let the other party believe their performance is working. They allow confidence to build on the other side, which produces more revealing behavior, which generates more intelligence. And then, at the precise moment of maximum strategic value, they deploy what they've learned in a way that the other party cannot connect to having been read. This is the highest expression of the skill, not just reading people, but reading them without their knowledge, accumulating a complete psychological picture over the course of an interaction, and then acting on that picture at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right way. When you've accurately identified someone's real pressure point, their genuine desperation, their actual walk-away number, their personal fear that's driving the business decision, you don't announce it. You simply structure your offer to speak directly to that pressure point, as though you intuited it through empathy and business acumen. They feel understood. They feel like you've read the situation brilliantly. What actually happened is that you read them. They walk away thinking you're a uniquely perceptive and generous deal maker. What you actually are is someone who knew the outcome before the conversation started. Here's what all of this means when you look at it directly. Every major interaction you've ever had with someone operating at this level, every negotiation, every pitch, every job interview, every deal, they were reading you the entire time. While you were managing your words and thinking about what to say next and worrying about how you were coming across, they were watching your face, tracking your body, listening to your voice, mapping your avoidances, cataloging your deviations from baseline, and building a complete and accurate picture of your psychological state. You thought the conversation was happening on one level. It was happening on two simultaneously, and you were only present on one of them. This is not a reason for paranoia. It is a reason for preparation. Because the answer to being read is not to become unreadable. That's nearly impossible against someone truly skilled. The answer is to understand the game well enough to play it consciously, to develop your own baseline awareness so deviations don't betray you, to practice the regulation of your physiological responses under pressure, to learn to communicate at both levels simultaneously, managing not just your words, but the full behavioral signal you're broadcasting. And most powerfully, to learn to read the people who think they're reading you. Because here's the truth that the most elite operators know and rarely share. The best readers in the world are also the most readable, if you know what to look for. Their systematic approach to assessment has its own tells. Their baseline gathering phase has a pattern. Their deployment of what they've read has a signature. The game is being played whether you're aware of it or not. The only question is whether you're a participant or a subject. Now you know the difference.